right.
Especially because they'd heard that the Spanish were also in there trying to, maybe do the same thing. Right? So it was a race for...
Yeah.
Exactly. It was a race for who's going to get there first, who's going to find El Dorado first, right? So, Sibel, you want to tell us what happens next?
Yeah, absolutely. So they start going towards El Dorado, and as they're moving up, they have been told by King James I that there's only one rule. And the one rule is you are not to fight the Spanish.
Do not fight the Spanish because we are trying a rapprochement with them at the moment. If you endanger that, Sir Walter Raleigh, you can consider yourself be headed. I like how that rolls off the tongue, don't you? Right. So there was really one rule, right? And so simple enough rule, right? Just mind your business, do your thing. Don't start any mess, right? Yeah.
So Keymis is now in charge of the mission, and Sir Walter's son, Walter, incidentally, is also going up the river in search of El Dorado. Along the way, what happens is they run into a Spanish garrison. And for whatever reason, they decide that the way through is to attack the Spanish. They attack the Spanish.
Grave mistake.
Spaniards die. They do not find
Not a lot of Spaniards die, but, Spaniards die. By English swords at this point.
The rule has been broken. And
Keymis knows this.
Keymis gave the order.
Because there were accounts, right, that, Raleigh had imprinted upon Keymis. You can do whatever you like. Now, again, let's not even talk about how horrible that was, because, again, by giving you carte blanche and saying you can do whatever you like, right, in a place that has its own indigenous peoples, right, that is already saying, oh, yeah, burn, pillage, kill, rape, murder, whatever. But don't, and I repeat, don't start any ruckus with the Spanish.
Don't beef with the Spanish.
Right. So he knew this, and he still was hot-headed enough to start some mess, right?
Yep.
And people die. Spanish people die.
And Sir Walter's son dies.
And Sir Walter's son dies.
Yeah.
So a combination of this, right? So here's Keymis thinking, oh my goodness, right?
What have I done?
His boss's son essentially had been killed under his watch, right?
While he broke the one rule he had given him.
The one rule, right? Don't kill any Spanish people. So essentially he sort of stalls for time, and he's trying not to go back to the ship, because if he goes back, he has to sort of report what's happened, right? And ultimately he goes back and he tells Sir Walter, and at that moment, right, Sir Walter knows. He knows, right? Because already, first of all, his son is gone, right? And he writes this really heartbreaking letter to his wife, right? About, just how devastated he was, and he says Keymis doomed them. Essentially, it was, the sentiment behind the letter is Keymis had doomed them. He was devastated, and he knew. I feel, because again, at that point, he could have tried to go somewhere else, right? I think he knew, as he was sailing back to England at that point, that he was going to face the wrath and possible death ordered by King James. Because don't forget, he was never really chummy with King James. It was only his, exaggerated writings about El Dorado that had, convinced the king to let him go out once again to look.
And also, we have to. The thing that I need to add in there is that when Keymis got back, and reported to him.
Oh,
and,
yeah, that's true.
And Sir Walter made it clear that Kemys had messed up. Kemys went,
and there was no forgiveness to be had here. Yeah.
Kemys went and stabbed himself in the heart.
Oh!
He stabbed himself in the heart. And so when they went back, there's also, Sir Walter's going back with son dead. And the one other scapegoat other than himself, which could have maybe been acceptable, has killed himself.
Right. So has killed himself. So
the only
justice
person
had to be had.
The only justice that would be had was on Sir Walter.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, you have to give us a body. Like, someone has got to die by royal decree.
Absolutely.
It's just not. It's not enough that the person who did the thing has killed himself. You came back, so you're gonna get the axe. Essentially, that's what that is, and it's just it's such a barbaric time, really. I mean, for all the splendor and grandeur and all the art and science that came out of this time, it's still such a barbaric time. It's like the logic of the decisions that are taken is terrible.
It's very inhuman.
It's terrible, yeah. But again, I'm sure being an experienced player in the court himself, he must have known that as he sailed back, that was his last bit of freedom ever. There's no way he did not know this, right?
Well,
because
I'm assuming he still had one more son and his wife in England, and I'm assuming that he knew that if he didn't return, they would
make them pay. Right. Probably. There you go. That's another angle. So again, speaking to the barbarity of it all, I mean, son and wife who had nothing whatsoever to do with anything, they would end up being, penalized for his, mistakes. But yeah, he got back, and of course, there was no explanation to be given. You had to go. You had to go to prison, and again, by this time, the Spanish were out for blood because, don't forget, Spanish people had been killed. Mm-hmm. So they said to James, "Look, my friend, we tried a lot to be on cordial terms with you, but I must insist at this point, blood has been shed. Spanish blood has been shed, so the only recourse for justice in this case is you have to behead this man." And so, it kind of put James in a very tight situation.
Yeah, there was no option. Right? I mean, it's almost the only option outside of war.
Right. It's kind of like, are we going to go to war for this dude that I don't really mess with anyway?
No,
you know what I mean?
It's not worth it.
Right. Like if James had been super chummy with Raleigh, right, you could kind of maybe see him, holding out a little bit, but it was kind of like, you know what, this dude is too much trouble. He's gone twice now. He hasn't brought anything back. He's always getting into trouble. Okay, sure. We do the deal. Let's shake on it, right? And so,
blood for blood.
Blood for blood. So, unfortunately, that's what happened. And he goes in, and so what they did, right, was his death sentence. From the time that, remember the time where they had told these lies about him. They'd said he wanted to overthrow the king, and that had been pardoned and all that. That death sentence was now reinstituted, right? So that was the pretext under which Sir Walter Raleigh was eventually beheaded, right?
Beheaded.
Yeah. So that was really, really sad, I would say. And this happened on October 29, 1618, right? And so I think, you know what? I think he had his troubles, and I think he was a messy dude. But what he was killed for, right, is very questionable. Now, if we're talking about him as a human being considering the fact that he had probably killed and maimed and all in the name of queen and country and all that stuff. Absolutely no sympathy from me, right? I mean, this was one of the dudes that was responsible for settlements in North America, and you know what that's code for. This was genocide. This was displacement of indigenous people.
Yeah.
This was a lot of things. So again, as a human being, purely as a human being, absolutely I don't feel bad for him, in that sense. But
fair enough.
Fair
enough.
But if you're looking at the pretext under which he was ultimately killed, that was messed up. That was messed up.
Yeah.
So,
I think it comes down to what we were saying earlier. He was playing a very high stakes game when he decided to enter the court.
He was.
It kept getting more and more high stakes as he as he kept trying to find something more to offer that would basically buy his
place in history, and he wanted to solidify his legendary status.
Yeah, wanted to get his reputation back. Almost, he was trying to buy his reputation back by achieving something crazy, and so the stakes just kept getting higher and higher and higher. And it was almost inevitable in a way.
It was almost inevitable. I mean, again, we were saying this was a guy who was smart. He was well read. He had been to several places in the world. He had been in charge of men and armies. He had been the head of the Queen's Guard.
Oh,
he had received all kinds of favor and recognition.
Right.
But the story, the story and the temptation of El Dorado was so great for him that he ultimately risked it all
and lost his son and died himself.
And lost his son and lost his life. Right. Yep. So that was quite the harebrained scheme, Sibel.
Absolutely. Truly harebrained, my friend. Truly harebrained.
Now, personally, if I ever were to receive word of a kingdom somewhere with gold and prizes to be plucked from trees and pinched off the ground, I would, the first thing I would do would be to ask Alfred to verify, right? Alfred, come over here. Yeah, it would be, because it's kind of like, it's crazy. There must have been something about the story, Sibel, that was compelling enough to make him think, you know what? There's something there. I'm going to put myself at risk. I'm going to because these trips, again, don't forget, during these times, these trips were not plane rides where you go 12 hours later. This was months on the sea. This was, risking the climate and the weather and all that and putting yourself on the line to go find these things, right?
Yeah.
And then
it even says, I remember in one of the articles, it said that there was an indigenous man that he became friends with and who he talked to about El Dorado. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the people who also confirmed that El Dorado existed and told him which direction to go to. So now, for what it's worth, it seems like he was getting a lot of the same stuff coming from a lot of directions.
Why would I, as an indigenous person, why would I ever tell you anything other than something that would lead to your doom, right? You've come, you've taken over, you've displaced my people. Of course, I'm going to say, yeah, sure. Over there, if you take a left.
That horrible river, up that horrible river filled with alligators, if you keep going right over the waterfall and the jagged rocks, there's a city just filled with gold. Filled.
Now, if you're mauled by a jaguar, you've gone too far. You have to come back. You have to retrace your steps a little, right by the alligator pit, take a sharp left, hard right, and then sure, there it is. It is, right? Yeah. Why would I ever tell you that? No, it's a lie. No, I want you to keep going to your doom, right? Because
I think the reality is it was a very, even now, a lot of things are just. Is a disconnected time. And I think there was a very real myth and a very real legend that stood. And there were other mythical cities and places, Atlantis, etc., which So he kept hearing the same thing again and again. And
Right.
the thing he did not catch on was that it was a myth.
That it
But
was
then
a
again,
myth.
one
Yeah.
wonders, did the Spaniards, when they heard of the Aztecs and the Incans, was
Mhm.
it the exact same way? And it turned out to be true.